Welcome to Shadow Fable. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications if you dare. They say a photograph captures a moment forever. But what if it captures something more? Something that was never meant to be seen or remembered. Jonas Whitaker never intended to become a photographer. It was a hobby, a way to pass the time when the world felt too heavy. He liked the quiet click of the shutter, the way light and shadow froze in perfect harmony. He worked a dreary office job during the week and spent his weekends wandering the city with his camera, capturing fragments of life. An old man feeding pigeons, the distorted reflection of neon lights in a rain puddle, a woman laughing on a park bench. It was a solitary kind of joy, one that expected nothing in return. Until the photographs changed. It started with a simple portrait, a young woman at a bus stop. She was alone, staring at the ground, her dark hair falling over one shoulder. He took the shot instinctively, drawn by the sadness in her posture. When he developed the image that evening, something felt wrong. It wasn't the composition, it wasn't the lighting, it was her. In the photograph, she was looking directly at him, not at the camera, not past it, but at him. Jonas stared at the image for a long time, his stomach knotting. He was sure, absolutely sure, that she had never lifted her head. He would have noticed. He would have remembered those eyes, dark and knowing, cutting through the lens like they could see him, truly see him. A trick of the light, he told himself. A coincidence. But the next photograph was worse. A man at the corner of 12th and Holloway, checking his watch as he waited for the crosswalk signal. Jonas had snapped the picture without thinking, moving on before the light changed. But in the developed image, the man wasn't looking at his watch. He was looking at Jonas, mouth slightly open, as if he had been caught in the middle of speaking. Jonas flipped back through his previous shots, heart pounding. He saw it again and again. Faces turned toward him that had never moved in real life. A woman pushing a stroller, her lips parted in surprise. A child on a swing, his grin replaced by a look of quiet recognition. A homeless man on a park bench, staring at the lens with empty eyes. Jonas felt sick. He told himself to stop. He told himself it was just his imagination, some strange coincidence, some flaw in the developing process. But he couldn't. He started taking photographs compulsively, obsessively, desperate to prove himself wrong. He took pictures of strangers on the train, in cafes, on street corners. Each time, he watched them carefully, making sure they never looked up. But in the photographs, they always did. They saw him, and then one of them smiled. It was a man in a dark coat standing at the entrance of an alleyway. Jonas had captured him from a distance, framed perfectly by the crumbling brick walls. He had been looking down, shoulders hunched against the cold, but in the photograph his head was lifted. And he was smiling. Not a friendly smile, not a kind smile, a knowing smile. Jonas dropped the photograph, heart hammering. He didn't sleep that night. The next day, he deleted the photos from his digital camera. He tore up the printed ones, burned them in the sink. He told himself it was over. And then his phone buzzed. A message. No name, no number, just a photograph. Of himself. Taken from behind, his breath caught. His fingers trembled as he scrolled up. Another message. Another photo. Closer this time. Another, closer still. Until the last one. His own face. Staring at the screen. And behind him, the man in the dark coat, smiling. Jonas dropped his phone. It hit the floor with a dull thud, the screen still glowing, still displaying that impossible image. His breath came in short, shallow gasps. He didn't dare turn around. His body felt locked in place. Every muscle tensed, waiting for something. Anything to move behind him. The room was silent. Too silent. The kind of silence that pressed in, that had weight, that felt unnatural. His own heartbeat pounded in his ears. Slowly, he forced himself to move. His hands clenched into fists, then released. He bent down, snatched up the phone, and in one swift motion turned. Nothing. The apartment was empty, his stomach twisted. His front door was locked, bolted. His windows were shut, the blinds drawn. There was no way anyone had been inside. And yet someone had taken that photograph. A cold prickle ran up his spine. He backed up against the wall, gripping the phone so hard his fingers ached. He forced himself to look at the screen again, at that last image. His face, pale and wide-eyed. And behind him, Jonas squinted. The man in the dark coat was still there, but something was off. The way he was standing, the way his head was tilted. Jonas zoomed in. The man's face wasn't quite right. His features were blurred, smudged, like a painting smeared before the paint had dried. His smile was still there, but it seemed to shift the longer Jonas stared at it, stretching unnaturally, curling at the edges like something too wide, too knowing. Jonas swallowed hard. He deleted the messages, every single one. Cleared the cache, restarted his phone. When the screen came back on, another message, no number, no name. Just 2 words. Look outside. His breath hitched. His thumb hovered over the screen, hesitating. He didn't want to look. He shouldn't look. But some awful, crawling instinct inside him needed to know. Jonas forced his legs to move, step by step, toward the window. His apartment was on the 3rd floor, overlooking a quiet street. He reached for the blinds, fingers shaking. He pulled them open. And there, standing on the sidewalk below, the man in the dark coat, looking up at him, smiling. Jonas stumbled back, his chest tightening, his vision tunneled. He squeezed his eyes shut, willing himself to breathe. When he opened them again, the man was gone. The street below was empty. Jonas stood there for a long time, frozen, his hands clenched at his sides. His mind raced through possibilities, through rational explanations. A stalker, a cruel prank, some elaborate, nightmarish coincidence. But none of it made sense. Not the photographs, not the messages, not that smile. Jonas didn't sleep that night. He sat in his apartment, every light on, staring at the front door, waiting for a knock that never came. By morning, he had made a decision. He was leaving. He didn't know where. He just knew he had to go. He packed a single bag, threw his camera inside without thinking, and grabbed his keys. He didn't look at his phone. Didn't check for new messages. Didn't dare. He stepped outside, breathing in the cool morning air. The world felt normal. People passed by on the sidewalk, sipping coffee, talking on their phones. For a moment, Jonas almost convinced himself that he had imagined it all. Almost. Then he saw the newspaper stand. The front page, a photograph. A blurry, grainy shot of a familiar street. His street. And there, standing beneath the glow of a street lamp, the man in the dark coat. The headline sent ice through Jonas's veins. Missing man found dead in apartment. Camera discovered with unexplained photos. His fingers tightened around the strap of his bag. He forced himself to breathe, to move. He needed to get out of here. Jonas turned away from the stand, heart pounding, and kept walking. He didn't see the man watching him from the reflection in the store window. Still smiling, But something inside him, some primal instinct buried deep in his bones, reacted. A shiver ran down his spine, his pulse spiking. He walked faster, gripping the strap of his bag as though it could tether him to reality, to reason, to anything that made sense. He needed to leave. Now, the city was waking up around him. The streets buzzed with morning commuters, the scent of fresh bread and exhaust thick in the air. People rushed past, heads down, lost in their own lives. Jonas scanned the faces in the crowd, looking for him. Nothing. No dark coat, no too wide smile, no smudged, shifting features. Maybe he was gone. Maybe... A cold hand brushed against his shoulder. Jonas spun, his breath catching. No one. His heart hammered. He could still feel it, that touch, light, but deliberate, like someone making sure he knew they were there. A breeze stirred the leaves on the pavement. He swallowed hard, forcing himself to keep moving. He wouldn't stop. Not until he was far away from here, from whatever was happening. He reached the train station, paid in cash, and took the first ticket out. It didn't matter where, it just had to be away. The platform was nearly empty. He sat on a cold metal bench, tapping his foot anxiously as he waited. His bag sat beside him, the weight of his camera pressing against his ribs like a buried secret. Don't look at it. Don't think about it. He clenched his jaw and stared at the empty tracks ahead. Minutes passed. Then, the sound of a camera shutter. Jonas went rigid, not his camera. Slowly, he turned his head. Across the platform, at the far end, stood a woman, holding a camera, pointed at him. Jonas's throat went dry. She was still, unnaturally still, her long coat unmoving in the breeze. He couldn't see her face, but she was staring directly at him through the lens. Click. Another photo. Jonas grabbed his bag, his legs unsteady as he stood. The train was coming, the distant hum growing louder. He took a step toward the platform's edge. Click. His breath hitched. She hadn't moved, but now she wasn't alone. A man stood beside her, a dark coat, a smile that stretched too wide. Jonas's knees nearly gave out. His vision blurred at the edges, panic squeezing his chest. He stumbled backward, his mind screaming, "Run! Run! Run!" The train roared into the station. The doors slid open. He didn't hesitate. He threw himself inside, nearly tripping over his own feet. The doors shut behind him with a mechanical hiss. He turned to the window, pulse racing. The platform was empty. No woman, no man. Jonas exhaled shakily, pressing his forehead against the glass. The train lurched forward, carrying him away. Away from... His phone buzzed. His hands shook as he pulled it from his pocket. A message, no name, no number, just a single image, a photograph, of himself, taken from inside the train, and in the reflection of the window. The man in the dark coat, still smiling. Jonas's breath caught in his throat. His fingers went numb, nearly dropping the phone. This wasn't possible. He was alone in the train car. The reflection in the window showed only him. Only him. But the photograph said otherwise. His own pale face, wide-eyed, staring at the screen. And behind him, slightly out of focus but unmistakable, the man in the dark coat. Jonas whipped around, his heart hammering. Empty. Rows of vacant seats, the dull hum of the train on the tracks, the rhythmic sway of movement. No one else was there, but the air felt wrong. Heavy, like something unseen had settled into the space beside him. He clenched his jaw and turned his attention back to the phone, forcing himself to study the image again. His own reflection looked tense, shaken, but the man behind him... Jonas's stomach twisted. The man's face was different, blurry, distorted. The edges of his features rippled, shifting like something caught mid-transformation. And the smile, it was stretching. Slowly, subtly, wider than before. Jonas's breath came in quick, shallow gasps. He opened his camera app, switched to selfie mode, and aimed it behind him. Nothing. Just the empty train car. But when he turned the phone back around, another message, another photo. Jonas swallowed hard. He didn't want to look. But his thumb moved anyway, tapping the message open. This time, the picture was closer. Too close. The man's face, smudged, warping, the mouth curving into something inhuman, was right behind Jonas's shoulder. His skin prickled. He could almost feel the presence looming there, unseen but real. His pulse pounded in his ears. Another message. Don't turn around. Jonas let out a ragged breath, his fingers trembling. The train rocked gently, the overhead lights flickering for just a second. Just long enough to cast shadows that shouldn't have been there. He clenched his jaw. He had to get off this train. Now, he yanked his bag onto his lap, gripping it tight, willing the minutes to pass faster. He kept his eyes locked on the floor, on the scuffed linoleum, on anything but the window. The next stop couldn't come soon enough. The train slowed. Jonas was already on his feet before the doors even opened, stepping out onto the platform the moment the gap was wide enough. Cool night air hit him like a slap. He staggered forward, his breath ragged, his hands shaking as he pulled his phone from his pocket. Another message. One word, wrong stop. Jonas's stomach dropped. He looked up. The station was empty. No people, no noise, no train schedule on the flickering boards. And the name of the station, there wasn't one. Just a blank metal sign. His breath hitched. The train behind him rumbled, its doors still open. Jonas turned back, ready to jump inside again. But the seats weren't empty anymore. Row after row of passengers. All of them looking straight at him. Mouths slightly open. Eyes wrong, too dark, too knowing. Jonas stumbled backward, his pulse roaring in his ears. The doors slid shut. The train pulled away, and he was left standing alone in a station that didn't exist. Jonas stood frozen, his breath shallow, his mind struggling to make sense of the impossible. The station was dead silent. No footsteps, no murmuring voices, no distant hum of city life filtering through the tunnels. Just stillness and the sign, blank. A cold, creeping dread curled around his spine. He turned in slow circles, scanning the platform, searching for something. A bench, a map, a timetable. Anything that told him where he was. Nothing. The walls were smooth concrete, the lighting dim and sterile. The air smelled faintly of damp stone and something else, something metallic, almost coppery. His phone buzzed again. Jonas flinched, gripping it tightly. His fingers hovered over the screen. He didn't want to look. Didn't need to look. He already knew. But his hand moved anyway. A message. Come back. Jonas exhaled shakily, shaking his head. Number, no, I'm done. I'm not playing this game. He turned toward the stairwell at the far end of the platform, its shadowed mouth leading up, out. He started walking. The sound of his own footsteps echoed unnaturally, stretching longer than they should have. Something moved in his peripheral vision. Jonas stopped. Slowly, he turned his head toward the other end of the platform. A figure stood there, not moving, not speaking, but watching. The man in the dark coat. Jonas's breath hitched, his muscles tensed, ready to run. The lights overhead flickered, and in that half-second of darkness the figure was closer. Not running, not stepping, just closer. Jonas's pulse roared in his ears. The lights flickered again, closer. Jonas backed away, his breath coming in short, panicked bursts. His legs felt like lead, his body locked between fight and flight. Another flicker, closer. The man's face was still blurred, shifting, that smile curving impossibly wide. Jonas turned and bolted for the stairs. His feet pounded against the concrete, his breath ragged as he took the steps 2 at a time. He didn't dare look back. The lights overhead buzzed. The air behind him felt wrong, like it was stretching, warping, reality bending just slightly out of place. Jonas reached the top of the stairwell and shoved against the exit door. It didn't budge. His stomach twisted. He pushed again. Nothing, locked, no handle, no way out. His phone buzzed. Jonas squeezed his eyes shut, shaking. He didn't need to look, didn't want to look, but his hand moved anyway, a message. "We just want to see you." Jonas let out a shuddering breath. His fingers tightened around the phone. Slowly, hesitantly, he turned. The stairwell was empty, but he wasn't alone. They were there. Rows of them. Standing silently on the steps below. A dozen, then more. All the people from the train. Their heads tilted, their eyes too dark, too empty. And at the front of them, the man in the dark coat, smiling. Jonas's vision blurred, his body locking up as a cold, unseen force crept toward him. His phone buzzed one last time. A final message, a single image of him, standing exactly where he was, with the crowd behind him. But in the photograph, his face was turned toward the camera, and he was smiling too. Don't forget to subscribe if you're still here.